Only the 3 promoted teams have a worse defensive record than Spurs. I'll be breaking down the defensive weakness that Spurs must fix and how Chelsea exposed it in their 1-0 win at Stamford Bridge. Is the problem Ange, or is it the players' fault? Last season, it was set pieces. This season, it's open play crosses. Ange Postecoglou's teams hate facing crosses. And Chelsea exploited this time and time again in this game at Stamford Bridge. And we'll start off by analysing the winning goal from Enzo Fernandez in the game that comes from this crossing situation. And there's 3 things that I want you to keep an eye out for as I'm analysing this footage. The first is the lack of pressure on the crosser. And as Cucurella has this ball, he plays it out wide to Cole Palmer. And Jed Spence here, you can see that he's the one that should be getting out to Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer has the ball, and he seems too preoccupied with trying to mark Sancho, even though they have numerical superiority down that side with Bentancur on the cover, Bergwijn behind him, and Odegaard there just in case. And he should be shooting out to Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer on his left foot, his favoured best foot, and he's still not getting out to him as he's about to strike the ball. And that's the first mistake they kept making in the game. But then we get onto what happens in the box. Now what Chelsea tried to do is they tried to overload the box. They tried to at least have the same number of players as Spurs, if not more. And the likes of Enzo Fernandez in that box 10 or Cole Palmer on the other side if they're crossing from that right hand side, tried to get into the box as well as the fullbacks as well if they can. But in this situation here, it's not that just overload the box. Spurs' positioning is just, I can't even tell you if this has been coached or not. I know the one thing that has been coached is that they try and hold a high line for as long as possible. I still don't get this tactic. Chelsea do this tactic themselves. But you see the main problem here is not just the high line, it's the positioning of the players. Romero here is way too far away from that near post. And then what happens then is Van de Ven is overloaded through Jackson and Enzo Fernandez in that central area. Udogie is preoccupied by Neto and doesn't really come in on the cover as well. I don't want to blame him too much because I think the problem is with Romero and then Van de Ven over covering in that situation. But if I move it on, that's where they should be. Goal side of their players in line with the width of that goal post. And you can see then they're in a better position to mark all 3 players. But then also, from a zonal perspective, you're covering a number of situations in terms of where that ball could drop in the box. The gap between them is just insane from a crossing situation where there's no pressure on the ball. And this problem happened time and time again. Nicholas Jackson makes a simple run into the box, but because of Romero's positioning, Van de Ven overcommits a bit too much to Nicholas Jackson. Udogie doesn't have enough time to recover once Van de Ven makes that movement. And look at this. A free header in the middle of the 6-yard box. I don't understand this high line. I don't understand what they've been coached in terms of the distances between players because this happened time and time again. And Chelsea didn't just do this. They targeted that back post area. And Spurs were warned about this from the Sancho chance in the first half. You can see Van de Ven just has to cover when Enzo Fernandez makes that run into the channel. Maddison and that midfield line doesn't feel like they've been told to track them runs in between the fullback and the centre back. That's okay. But again, the lack of pressure. Once Enzo Fernandez makes that clever run, he opens up all that space on the inside for Neto to drive onto his stronger foot and then have a crossing opportunity on goal. As Neto cuts in, Bentancur covers for Van de Ven in the middle, but the main problem isn't Bentancur. Look at Romero and Jed Spence here. I feel a little bit more sorry for Jed Spence, given that he's got such an overload on that back post. Cole Palmer's making a run in between him and Romero. Cucurella's making a run on his blind side. But the main problem is Sancho. It feels like he has no awareness of either of those players at the back post. Doesn't really react when that ball goes over his head. Romero's jumping out. He's trying to catch Jackson offside and doesn't even think about Cole Palmer making a run right behind him. No scanning, no awareness. Sancho has time to take a touch. Lovely little touch. He probably should score here, but it's a lovely little finish and a beautiful save from Vicario. But they were warned. Before the Enzo Fernandez goal, they were warned time and time again about these crossing situations. Whoever's the opposition analyst at Chelsea didn't have to go too far into the tapes to find how to beat this Spurs team. If you go to the Bournemouth game, everyone remembers it for that Kirkes run and beautiful cross into the box. But look at Spurs on the transition. Romero should be tucking in. Porro's there on the cover. He'll get to Kirkes. Romero should be tucking in. Semenyo's making a lovely dart inside him. He wouldn't be able to track that if that's played in behind. Danzo in the middle, not really touched tight to Evan Nilsson. Jed Spence, the worst of them all. Goal side of Tavernier. Not goal side of Tavernier. Totally sleeping on that back post area. Beautiful cross from Kirkes. Finds him perfectly, and it's a beautiful finish from Tavernier. But this isn't it. Let's go to the Man City game. Haaland. You let Haaland drift into the 6-yard box without even breaking a sweat. Doku has that ball in that wide area, and look at this defensive line from Spurs. And it's just a simple straight ball through the middle of their defensive line, and Haaland taps it in. Udogie, don't get me started on back post defenders. He did it in that Chelsea game. Jed Spence doing it on the other side against Kirkes and in the Chelsea game as well. The back post crosses are killing the Spurs team. Now, earlier on, you heard me say that Spurs had the 4th worst defense in the league, only beaten by the promoted teams. And you're probably thinking, how is that true? The goals against column, they're fairly mid-table, around the likes of Man United, Fulham. But it's the underlying data. That's what you should be worried about. They're 4th worst in terms of expected goals against. They should have conceded around 49, 50 goals, and only the promoted teams are worse than them in this metric. And you're probably thinking, data, expected goals, doesn't mean anything, but this is the underlying data. It's the likes of the luck, the goalkeeper performance that has kept their goals against lower than it should be. And that's why it's a big worry. And then you have to ask yourself, is it Ange or is it the players? When you look at the crossing situations that I analysed earlier, if I put another manager, let's say Iriola, for example, if I put Iriola into that position, if I put another Premier League manager into that position, would those exact same players deal with crosses in the exact same way? Would they perform better? I think the answer for me is 100% yes. I don't think Ange is working on this. The off-the-ball work from Spurs isn't great. Once you get through that press, I don't think they know how to deal with transition moments. In terms of fast break shots, the shots that they concede in on the counter-attack, quick attacks, they're the 4th worst in the Premier League. And there's something underlying about Ange's tactics, this Ange ball. Ange ball was great going forward. They had one of the best attacking statistics, the amount of shots they create, the XG they create. But now he's got his players back. You expected an improvement off the ball in particular, especially as the defensive players in Van der Ven, Romero, Udogie, Spence in that back line. Feels quite a talented back line. And yet the same problems again. And that's where you have to lay the problem at the feet of Ange Postecoglou. But this is not just the Ange Postecoglou problem. There have been managers that have come to Spurs, succeeded before Spurs, left Spurs and succeeded after Spurs. You got the Conte rant. You got the Mourinho rant. You got Nuno Espirito Santo doing what he's doing at Nottingham Forest. There's an underlying dirt. There's like a stain, a ghost on this club that is preventing them to reach the top level. And you got to admit that there's one man that has been at the club throughout all of that period, and that is Daniel Levy. And I think the biggest problem is that wage structure. He's running a great football operation in terms of the business, but when you keep that wage structure so low compared to the other Premier League clubs in that top half, in that top 6, the type of player you're attracting isn't the one that's going to push on Spurs and get them into that title race conversation, the trophy conversation. Dominic Solanke is a talented player, but paying £60 million in fees doesn't address the fact they could have bought someone for a much higher level of talent, high level of potential, personality, the one that's going to drag them through into that top 4 regularly, title races. If you compare the return of Nicholas Jackson that came back, he's not even the top level elite striker that I'm talking about, but the aggressiveness, the personality he has, the problems he caused that Spurs side on his return. Yeah, he's not taking every chance, but look at the heat map between the two of them in that game. In and around that box for Jackson, deep, nice link play here and there for Solanke. He's just spent by the time he gets to the edge of that box. Not really contributing in and around the box, the goals, the assists. But Ange Postecoglou will probably get sacked for not winning the Europa League. A new manager will come in and the cycle will repeat. Unless they break that wage structure, unless they bring in someone that knows the football side, the same problems will occur. So Spurs fans, let me know what you think down in the comments. What do you think of the game? What were the problems you saw? Tactically, what do you think of Ange Postecoglou? Is he going to survive next season? I doubt it, but let me know what you think down in the comments. Check out this video, another video from Game of Two Halves, and I'll see you on the next episode.